As our businesses grow and evolve, alongside of that grows the necessity to involve other key players within the development of the business, whether that's from providing services or from, in some way, contracting or something like that. Now, there's a lot of grey area there in terms of hiring the right people for your company, especially when it comes to hiring subcontractors. So it's really important that if you're going to go down that path, that you're doing it the right way. I know we speak to a lot of companies and a lot of individuals that have certainly had some poor counsel in regard to those sort of things, and as a result they've ended up in court and they've ended up in these battles which were pretty well avoidable if they had have just done a few things right initially, which of course is more or less a metaphor for life. But anyway, understanding, I suppose, fundamentally that when you're going to hire new people in to do work that represent your company, you do have some protection in the form of contracts, and you can, to a degree, protect yourself in spite of things potentially going south, like poor delivery of service, name defamation, and other things. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about what you need to consider when you're hiring, subcontractors that are coming into your business to essentially represent you and your company. And I suppose this conversation again has come out of the community. This is things that people are actually talking about within the trade. So I know it's going to be relevant to a lot of you guys. So I've got a lawyer back on the show, Helen, who's been on the show previously, and Helen's going to be talking specifically about that. So enjoy the show, guys, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations, and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form, and let's have a conversation.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Site Shed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Helen Kay, welcome back to the Site Shed podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Matt.
Absolutely. For the listeners and viewers out there that are not familiar or are newly tuning into the Site Shed podcast, first of all, welcome to the world's greatest business podcast for tradies and contractors. And secondly, Helen Kay, who's joining us from a recent series we did called Protecting Your Trade Business from Legal Risk. Helen is a lawyer, and she specialises in contract-related law. And we did a series back only in May, actually, which was very well received in relation to, well, we covered a few topics. The first one was how to make sure you get paid. The second episode which was 246. Episode 2 was how to make sure your business is ready for sale. And in episode 247, we spoke about how to make sure your intellectual property is safe. Back by popular request on topics which are also hot at the moment, what to consider when hiring contractors. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about how to stop competitors from stealing your clients. Both topics which I have had experience with in the past, so this is going to be fun. So Helen, you're from Rise Legal. Do you just want to tell us a little bit about, I suppose, what you do, just for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rise Legal is my firm. We're business lawyers, and we predominantly help trade business owners with their commercial contracts. So we operate very, very differently to a lot of law firms. We're solution providers. So it's a case of if you've got a headache, something's really making you anxious, we can take that off your hands and sort it out for you. I've got some great clients, a lot of whom listen to your show, Matt.
Yeah, I think the last series was quite well received, and as a result, you got a fair bit of a few clients from there, didn't you?
I did indeed. Yeah, some great people who I hope to work with for many years.
Yeah, guys, and if you're not in our community, Helen is in there, so you can head across to the private Facebook group, the Site Shed on Facebook, fill in the questions, and you'll be let in there eventually. And Helen's in there if you've got any questions relating to legal matters, especially on the contracts front. So, Helen, I suppose just a disclaimer, we should just qualify that you are located in Australia, and a lot of the stuff we may be covering does specifically resonate to the Australian system. However, we do try and keep this information as general as we can. So for all of you guys that are located offshore, please take on board what we're saying here. But as always, make sure you go and speak to a trusted professional in your market in relation to anything specific. So Helen, what to consider when hiring contractors? And I know actually it's funny, this is quite timely because all morning I have been recording a series on HR and onboarding. And as you know, I've been through a recent recruiting spree, and we've hired two full-time staff in the last couple of weeks. And things are insanely busy for a lot of people out there, which is kind of countering what we thought might have happened during this whole COVID situation. But I know there's a lot of contractors out there that are frantically trying to find talent. And to be honest, it's quite a good environment to be finding talent, because a lot of really high-skilled people, for the first time in my professional working career, there's talent around. People have lost their jobs and people have been displaced, and all of a sudden there's people with a lot of skills and they're looking for work. So I suppose a lot of those people are coming at businesses from a contracting point of view, which, as I'm sure we're going to allude to, is going to has its own problems as well as advantages. I suppose the purpose of these podcasts with you is to help the listeners and the viewers out there mitigate those risks. I suppose essentially we'd be talking primarily on this topic, the business owner or anyone who's in charge of HR in terms of the hiring side of things. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's correct. Definitely. And I think the thing is, biggest overarching thing with this, Matt, is not to rush into it. So that's going to be the theme of this, is just don't rush into it. This is going to be much like a marriage. Let's take it slowly and let's make sure we get it right the first time.
High, slow, fire, fast. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, so any of you guys that are out there and you're, looking at potentially bringing in a new team member, whether that be permanent or from a contractor point of view. And very often you might bring a contractor in that will start as a contractor and turn into a full-time staff member. So definitely worth listening to regardless. I'd say, yeah, just take some notes here, because I know I've recently gone through this process myself, and I've realised there are certain things that I had no idea about, especially in relation to things we may not even cover in this podcast, like paying super and that kind of stuff. So what essentially are we going to be covering today, Helen?
So I'm going to cover things like what you should be doing before you hire a contractor, what should go in a subcontractor's agreement. Obviously, I'm a commercial lawyer, so every problem a client has can be solved with a particular well-drafted commercial contract. Today we're talking about subcontractor agreements. So what goes in them, just a basic run through. And then the differences between employees and contractors. So there's a very fine line. There's lots of muddy water between the two. So I'm just going to give you an idea so that you can figure out, if you've got guys working with you at the moment, whether they're going to fall into an employee category or whether they're a genuine contractor.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because then you've got your part-times, your casual part-time, your full-time casual, your part-time, full-time casuals. It's like, what the heck? And they've all got different rights and different allowances and different pay brackets, and man, it's confusing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't do employment law. We were talking about that just before we went on. It is confusing, and as someone myself who employs people, again, I just take my time, make sure I get it right, make sure I get the right advice from my colleagues who do employment law.
Yeah. And you know what? It's so worthwhile, I think, just when it comes to it, just spending. I mean, I had an outsourced HR lady put together the contract for one of my recent onshore staff members full time, and for the sake of a few $100s or whatever it costs, it's such a headache to not have to worry about knowing that it's actually been done properly by someone who's got a legal background, and you're just crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's,
Yeah, and having that contact there as well that you can just call on them if there is an issue. Hopefully, if you get everything done right at the start and you pick the right person, there won't be issues. But it's the biggest headache for business owners, isn't it? Employees, staff.
Well, I think it is. I think one of the biggest headaches is the apprehension around not actually knowing what you're doing. And I was certainly in that boat. I mean, even though I've been there and done it before, you can't possibly know all of that stuff. I mean, there's so many little things there, little nuances that are so important and so paramount, which could turn around and bite you in the butt later if you don't get it right. And I've got friends and colleagues that listen to this podcast even, and they've been to hell and back with with staff issues, from from hiring the wrong people and then taking them to court and all this kind of carry on, and you think, man, it's a punish. And like from all the conversations I've had with them, they just seem to think that the system is so heavily geared towards the employee instead of the employer. So which makes it even more important to have these documents in place and have everything done the best that you can.
Absolutely, yeah. The employment definitely is swayed in favour of the employee. The law always favours the little man. So, but I think what I want to get across today, Matt, is there are options that, alternatives to employment and alternatives to having some of those headaches.
So, why don't we summarise what a contractor is essentially for those people that I feel like it's kind of one of those words that people throw around and don't really fully understand.
Yeah. So I guess there's no legal definition of it. A contractor is not an employee. So a contractor is somebody who has their own business and basically is responsible for their own enterprise, whereas a worker is somebody who you're responsible for and is part of your business. There's actually a number of ways you can discover whether the people working with you at the moment would be employees or contractors. It doesn't matter what you've called it. It basically comes down to what the bodies like the ATO view. So the ATO have got this great employee
for you guys offshore as well. The ATO is the Australian Taxation Office, actually, which makes me realise this may be a little bit confusing to the North American listeners out there, because in North America they refer to tradies or tradespeople as contractors. So for all of you North American contractors out there, we're talking today, I suppose, about
subcontractors.
Yeah, subcontractors. Yeah,
subcontractors. Yeah. So I'll try and use that terminology then, and just to make it a bit more easy for people to listen. So the Australian Taxation Office has a great tool, and I'm sure some of the other countries have got similar things where they've got a decision tool. You can go through and it asks you a series of questions about your employee stroke subcontractor, and you can work out, and this is just for tax and superannuation purposes, you work out whether they are an employee or a contractor. At the end of it, it generates a report that you can keep for your records. So as long as you answer those questions accurately and honestly, you can rely on the results.
Yeah, and so for a lot of the guys out there that aren't familiar, superannuation in Australia is the equivalent to the 401k in the US. And essentially, it's part of business owners' responsibility to pay and contribute to the superannuation fund on behalf of the employee. Even sometimes if they are not a full-time staff member, they are in fact a subcontractor or a contractor.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the things, Matt, when I speak to clients, speak to trade business owners, obviously they could have come to me for anything like a trademark or maybe company structure or something. I always try and get a bigger view of what's going on within the business. And I ask them, how many people have you got working with you? How many of them are employees? How many are contractors? And inevitably, there are grey areas as to some of the guys that they've got. And I say guys, I mean guys and girls. I'm just being colloquial. So some of the people that they've got working with them may be, have no contracts at all. And that happens quite a lot. I'm sure you've seen that as well, where there's just no contracts in place for quite well-established employment / business relationships. So I think the general rule, I would say, would be that companies are always contractors. So if you're bringing somebody in and they've got their own company, so you've actually hired, you've engaged with that company, they'll always be contractors, subcontractors, whatever we're referring to them. The work might be done by people like the directors or employees, but they're not your employees. However, when you hire an individual, you then need to look at the details of that working relationship to decide whether they're a contractor or an employee for tax and retirement superannuation purposes.
So essentially, what you're saying is if you're employing another company to do work for you, they're essentially responsible for paying their own taxes, paying their own superannuation, but that's not part of your responsibility as the, if you want to call it, principal contractor or whatever. However, as soon as they become a team member or a staff member on the books, then you do become responsible for paying tax, paying super allowances, so on and so forth, holiday pay, sick pay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is obviously, I'm going to keep talking about grey areas, but the grey area is when you hire an individual who's got an ABN, because a lot of people think, that means they're in business, therefore, that's as good as hiring a company. But no, again, you know, there's lots of rules about this. You know, there's the 80-20 rule of how much they work with you, with other people. So I really do recommend that if you've got people working with you and you're not 100% sure whether they're an employee or a contractor, and if you're in Australia, then jump on the ATO website and go through that decision tool. I can send you a link to that. We can put it in the show notes.
So essentially, what Helen was just saying was, even if you do hire somebody as a contractor or a subcontractor, if they spend more than 80% of their time working with you, so more than 80% of their income comes from you, then you essentially should be paying them some of the benefits of a employee, which could be things like superannuation. So even if they've got like a registered Australian business number, sometimes you have an obligation to be paying some of these benefits to that person. I mean, that is quite a grey one, because like even as the business owner employing these people, Helen, as a contractor, like how are you to know how much of their time they're spending with you and how much they're spending elsewhere?
Exactly. Yeah. And this is why it's so important that you really bed down what the arrangement is between you. I mean, I suppose you could tell from if you've got one guy and he's with you Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, then I think you can pretty much say that he's not got enough time to be doing something else. But but if you've got, you know, there's a lot of these people, you really need to keep an eye on it and make sure. I honestly think that the best thing to do is to err on the side of caution. So I get my clients to do that tool, and most often the report comes out and it shows that these people are employees, in which case we can have a contractors agreement in place, but make sure that they are paying the correct tax and superannuation, so that it doesn't all keep accumulating, so that years down the line they go, oh, you know, I've got 3 years worth of this stuff now. So I think the basic thing is take advice. I mean, I'm happy to speak to anybody about whether they've got contractors on board and whether they've protected themselves properly with their contracts, and can also, you know, great people in my network, I can also refer people on to employment lawyers, etc. But I think the main thing to do is to just think about what happens. So if you remember, I said that when you've hired an individual, they're not necessarily 100% then an employee just because you've hired Bob Smith, an individual, with or without an ABN. You have to actually look at the nature of the relationship, and this is where that contractors tool is great. So it runs you through basically the 6 factors that determine whether your worker is an employee or a contractor for tax and superannuation purposes. So the first one is whether contractors can actually subcontract and delegate their work, so they can pay somebody else to do it, whereas an employee can't. A contractor is paid for a result, so for a particular job based on a quote they've provided, whereas employees are paid for the time they work or, you know, an agreed price. And the main thing really, number 3, is the equipment and the tools and the assets. So contractors provide their own equipment, tools and assets because, like I said before, they're running their own business, they're their own enterprise. Whereas an employee either expects you to provide them as your employer, or if they provide them, they expect some sort of allowance or reimbursement for those tools and equipment.
There's actually a comment in the Facebook group the other day about, did you see that? It was somebody posted something. I think they just moved to Australia from Holland, and they were saying back in Holland they'd never heard of like staff having to provide their own tools, whereas here it's quite common. And I remember even when I was an apprentice, we had like a tool allowance, and we had to buy our own tools. And I think the mindset behind that was, if it's ours, we look after them.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? If it's someone else's, you leave them in the back of the ute and then come back and go, oh, it's been nicked again. That's happened.
Yeah, well, when I worked in the UK, I remember that used to happen all the time. Like people just couldn't care less about the tools, but they used to love having Australians and New Zealanders working for them because we all just treated everything like it was our own.
Yeah, so if you're giving tools and everything, so if somebody's coming up to work and then, you know, you're saying there's the van you need to take out, there's the tools, and the alarm bells should start ringing there that this isn't a genuine contractor. So that was number 4, is that the contractor actually takes some commercial risks. So they're actually they're legally responsible for their work. They're liable for the cost of rectifying any defects. Whereas again, on that whole blasé about your tools, is the employee particularly blasé about the work because they're not personally taking any commercial risk for it? If there's a problem with the work, it's the business. It's not the individual worker that's liable for the costs of rectifying the defects.
Yeah, it's one of those things. You sort of damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, isn't it? I mean, I know there's a lot of careless contractors out there as well, which I suppose brings testament to the fact that you've got to have the right policies and procedures and contracts in place when you're employing them. But I mean, that raises another question, doesn't it? Like, at what point do you, if you've had a relationship with somebody who's been providing a service for you for X amount of years, if you're re-engaging them to do some more work, is it every time they come back to you, you have to get them to sign a contract, or can you just get them to sign like an annual contract, or like, how does that work?
Loads of different ways you can do it, Matt. So, and this is something that I'd flush out in the phone call with the client, what the best procedure is. So you can have project-based contractor agreement. So if you're just about to embark on a large project, it's going to take some time, then bring these people in for that project. Yeah, so you can have job-specific contracts. So if you're bringing them into a large, infrastructure project, you can have them just contracted for that project. You can have rolling 12-month contracts, which, automatically renew at the end of each 12 months if neither party sends written notice to terminate. But with that one, you'd have to have some sort of job sheet requirement clauses in, which say that, this is how jobs will work. We will notify you of a job. We'll tell you of a price and expectations. You can accept the job. If you accept the job, you must start within X number of days, and you'll be working on that job under the terms of this contract.
So when you look at, say, builders, for example, and they're as a principal contractor and they bring subcontractors in, like carpenters, plumbers, electricians, landscapers, whatever, they're normally brought in under a project length contract. So they're basically the beginning, you get to sign this. And I know even back when I was in construction plumbing, 15 odd years ago or whatever, and man, even the builders back then weren't even builders. They were all like lawyers, and it was like, 300-page contracts. And it's like, it was the most daunting thing and the general consensus back then and probably today was that you just feel like you're signing your life away and you're leaving yourself open to just being absolutely screwed by the builder at the end of the day. And that's actually what happened to me, happened to a lot of other people I've spoken to, especially with those bigger building companies. It's almost like that's like their way of kind of hanging on to your retention.
Yeah. I obviously, not obviously, but I started my career out on the other side of the bench. So I worked for one of Australia's top law firms, and I was preparing those contracts. So I've acted for the big major principals. So I'm now obviously changed teams, and I'm acting for the subcontractors. But yeah, those contracts are really hard to get your head around. For me, I think my clients find that they go into it quite anxious because they've been presented with something very daunting, like you say. I can actually piece through those contracts quite easily and sort of say, these are the 10 main things that I really want to talk to you about. And then out of that, we might find maybe 5 of the things that my client's really anxious about. And then we can find a compromise. So you can amend these contracts. You can't amend the main body, but you can have a departure schedule. And if you can present your position to the main contractor in such a way, that we really want to do the job, but we cannot do it on this level. Our insurers can't allow that. But here's a compromise. And there's no reason why we can't get that as part of the deal. And then you can both go into it happy with, what you've agreed in writing.
I suppose the thing is, though, like as well, you've got like principal contractors that have put these, jobs out to tender to, dozens potentially of subcontractors. And if you want to turn around and say, well, I'd rather not sign this agreement, but here's one as a compromise, they're just as likely to go, well, screw you, we'll go to the next guy who'll sign it.
Yeah. Well, it's all commerciality as well, isn't it? Do you need that particular job? Have you costed that job? Has that job, has it got enough profit margin in it for you? And, and then you've got to decide, then you've got to look at the legal risks and the insurance risks, and then just figure out at the end of the day, if you can still do that job with and get those profit margins with some of those clauses in there, then go ahead. But if you can't, then would you be working for free almost? Yeah.
Well, and that's what was happening back in the day. Like essentially a lot of companies were, winning these jobs essentially to keep the staff employed, like with no profit margin. They were trying to make money off things like variations. And it was just ridiculous. Like from the minute you get on site, you're basically chasing your tail.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it does happen in every industry. Even professional services advisors can quote themselves so low that it's just there's no profit in it. But I guess yeah, you just need to. I think you just need to be comfortable with those agreements. Something I do, Matt, with a lot of my clients is I actually do like contract workshops. So when I've really got to know my client and what their appetite is for contracts, we'll run workshops with the sort of main people who come into contact with the contracts, just to let them know what they're looking for, why they're looking for it, and then what to do if they find it. So it's all about confidence in knowing what you're looking for.
Well, yeah, and I suppose that's why it's important to have, people like you in the corner, especially as a trades person. Like if you're a plumber, a builder, a sparky, and you're, going into a contract agreement with a builder or, something of the like, you don't know what you're looking at. You studied electrical, like you didn't study law, and these documents are literally like huge illegal. I mean, from my experience, they can be insane, and it's like just put a signature at the end kind of thing. It's ridiculous. So,
yeah.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, this is my trade, isn't it? I've been doing this for 21 years. So, but I wouldn't even have a clue how to rewire a plug. So, and I wouldn't try. I'd get somebody in that knows how to do it, and then I'd feel a bit more confident next time I flick the switch.
So, I mean, I suppose that raises another point for the listeners and viewers out there, is you kind of got to budget into these, into the cost of your job, these sort of things, like getting someone to review these policies, procedures, documents, contracts, all that kind of stuff. Because although it might cost you a bit up front, it's probably could potentially save you a lot. Trust me, it can save you a lot, because I've been there and I've been on both ends of it, and it's not a fun experience when you end up in court over something that's completely, at the end of the day, not even true. But things happen. Like some of these companies have so much money, it's almost part of their strategy to send the smaller companies bust, because I know you haven't got the money to fight them. So it's definitely worth investing in. Definitely,
yeah. My whole ethos is to keep people out of court. You know that. And that the only way to achieve that is through your processes and your contracts. So if you can get all of that tight at the start, then you don't have this worry throughout the project that it might all go pear-shaped at the end.
So if somebody does come to us, or if we're looking for, somebody to complete a job, I mean, maybe even not on the bigger scale, so maybe not like on the commercial level, but say like a residential scale, like we're looking at, we're a plumber and we've had to do a hot water installation that involved having to pull down part of a wall or something like that in order to get to the heater, or crane lift the other heater in. I mean, what sort of approach should we be taking in regard to employing someone like that? Because I mean, it's it's sort of a one-off job, and obviously they don't need to be there all the time. But then you got to make sure that they're ticking all the boxes in terms of compliance, and you've got your contracts in order and all that kind of stuff. I mean, how would something on a smaller scale like that operate?
Oh, look, even on a smaller scale, you should have, if you're operating a trade-based business, you should have a subcontractor agreement that's been drawn up for your business, but that's ready to go for any other subbies that you want to bring on board. Okay,
so it's kind of like a template.
Yeah, and I don't like to use the word template because that suggests that I might be using templates, but it would be your template. So it would have been tailored to your business, and it's ready for you and your team to use. So what would happen then is, people would come to me, we'd get it for your business, and then I'd teach you how to use it so that, you don't have to keep coming back to me. It's not like I'd give you a PDF with a draft watermark on and say, you can't use it, you need to come back to me each and every time. That would be yours. You'd have ownership of that document, and you'd also know how to use it. So it would be useful even for, the smaller one-off jobs. And those are the ones that can often have the most problems, where you just phone a mate and say, oh, look, I'm doing an install and I need, the electric's doing, can you pop over? There should be something in place with all the people that are on your phone list for that, as and when. And it's just one of those as and when contracts that I was talking about. So as and when we give you a job, we'll agree a price and it will be under the terms of this agreement. So that agreement should have a lot of things in place, should have the, how it's going to work in terms of, when they get paid and at what stage of the job you'll pay them. I guess this is the reverse of how to get paid. The podcast I did previously, this is how to pay. So you need to be clear about when you're going to pay these people. You need to also be clear that they're going to be responsible for their own taxes and their fees and charges, etc. So that would all go in a subcontractor agreement. You need to also set out health and safety obligations that you expect them to take on. So the subcontractor would declare that they're using safe equipment and that their staff have had adequate training. So this helps you pass on some of that liability. So as soon as this, because the contract that you've got in place in that scenario is between you and the homeowner. This person that you've rung to come in and do a job, that's your responsibility. It's not between the homeowner and the subcontractor. So you need to make sure that they're doing everything properly. You also want to make sure they've got the right insurance. So clauses in the contract which tell them what insurances they've got. And you should also make it clear who's responsible for the defects in their work. So if they do a shoddy job and then disappear off, that you need this in the contract to say that, if we call you, you will come back and sort it out at your own cost. Again, we were talking before about equipment and tools. Just make it clear in that contract that they're responsible for providing their own equipment and tools. That includes their work vans, etc.
Say it's a situation where you've got like something out for tender, or say you might be a builder and you've got a tender out for electricians. Is it part of their, I suppose when they come on board and they're like you're recruiting for these people, or they're tendering for the job, is part of the tendering process for them to go through the contract at that stage, or is that like once they sort of accept it, then they have to go through the contract?
No, it's at the tender stage. So what happens is, so if you are, and this is, all the ones I've seen have, so then maybe there's some out there that haven't, but more often than not, it's a case if you are the successful tenderer, you will sign the contract in the form that was provided with the request for tender. Yeah,
I reckon that's something that a lot of people would fall over on.
Yeah, they do. So what happens is, when my clients send me the request for tender and ask for my help preparing the tender, as part of that, a large part of what I do is review the contract and provide a schedule of departures with the response to tender.
Yeah, I think that'd be a big takeaway for a big aha moment for a lot of the viewers and listeners out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so in closing, I suppose, is there anything we should, or how about a summary? Why don't we just do a quick summary of what to consider when hiring contractors?
Yeah, well, there's the practicalities as well, which we haven't really discussed, but...
Oh, yeah, we can go through that if you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just know who you're dealing with, do your due diligence. So, ask for references. If they can't provide you with at least one or two people in the industry or clients that can tell you what good jobs they've done, then I'd be worried. But you can also do your sneaky online due diligence. You can look and see what kind of Google and Facebook reviews these people have had. I mean, that's a sure sign of a good or a bad business. Also, check their ABN. Just double check that ABN lookup. Make sure that the Australian business number, make sure they are who they say they are. If you're in Queensland, you might be able to check their QBCC license, or even check with QBCC that there's no ongoing issues with them. They've obviously got privacy obligations, but if something has been determined and is in the public domain already, then you'll be able to get that information. And then check their insurance. So I mentioned before that the subcontractor agreement should contain insurance clauses. Actually grab a copy of their insurance. I mean, there's nothing better than seeing the actual certificate of insurance.
As opposed to, do you have insurance? Tick the box, yes, no. It's like, give me a copy of your insurance.
Yeah, I just want a copy of it. Yeah, just grab a copy of it. Grab a copy of the driver's license.
So is that things like public liability?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, workers' comp, etc.
Workers' comp, okay, yeah.
Yeah, just grab all of that. If you have, I think the best thing to do, and this is again something I work on my clients with, is a checklist. So we'd have a checklist of when hiring, and you just go through it. And if you've grabbed all of those things and you've checked, and somebody in the office can do all this for you, But the main thing I'd say is, just as a human, trust your gut. If you think somebody just doesn't feel right, 9 times out of 10 they won't be a right fit. And more often than not, when I hear these horror stories of what's happened, and I've got really anxious business owners on the phone with me, they'll say something like, I never liked him, or I always thought there was something a bit strange. So, it's a non-legal thing, but just trust your gut.
I suppose it becomes like a bit trickier when we're we spend so much time like trying to dehumanize the process to a degree. Like we use automation and we send things out to tender and they submit a tender and we never actually speak to anyone, like but it can make, I always try and make a conscious effort to have conversations with people to see if we want to work with them.
Yeah, so do I.
And I openly admit to, I say all the time, like we turn way more work away than we accept, and that's just purely because there's a lot of people that come through to us that they don't fit the avatar for us, and that could be for a number of different reasons. But I always try and encourage guys to, at some point, humanize part of the process enough so you can make that gut feeling that you mentioned there. You can put that into play to a degree, because it's amazing how much it can help.
I know they say, they're even saying things like the legal profession is going to be replaced by, artificial intelligence and everything. I absolutely think we can be improved, and all industries can be improved by the use of systems and processes, but we always need that human element, because there's that gut instinct you can't teach a computer. A computer's not going to know whether somebody's a bit shifty or somebody's, well, God, don't scare me, Matt. But yeah, I'm like that. I've got great systems that work in the background for all my client checks and ID and all of that thing that will make sure it gets done and reminds me. But I have that call with the client as well, and I only want to work with people that I like, and then get to know and trust them.
I think as well, fundamentally, there's a lot of things that you can automate, and a lot of those things are the things that you just said, checklist related things, stuff that really doesn't require, calling and speaking to a reference. You can't automate that, something like that should probably not be an email, because, that email could go anywhere and be answered by anyone. They're really things that you can't replace with technology, I suppose. But however, I know, even with our processes, a lot of the automations, a lot of the steps within automations are asking for a human touch point. So at this point in an automation, contact, Matt or one of my staff to phone the customer or the prospect or the client or whatever, and have a conversation with them about X, Y, Z, and then go, that's one step of an automation, So you can build human touch points into technology related automations, and it's important that you do.
Definitely. Absolutely. So I guess back to your question then, the summary. So the summary was to do your due diligence on these people. Make sure that if you've decided they're a contractor and that's how they're going to come on board, hopefully because they're a company, or at least because they've got an ABN and you've decided that they're a genuine contractor, have a well-drafted subcontractors agreement in place, know how to use it and use it every time. Yeah, just make sure that you're not verging into employment law, and take the relevant advice.
I think as well, from a lot of my experience and a lot of conversations I have with friends and colleagues and members of the community and things like that, for the better part, a lot of those relationships, there's already an established B2B connection there at some point. It's, introduced, Nick from XYZ, he worked with, so-and-so over there, they did a great job, and he might know them. There's some sort of, often some sort of insider trading going on there. Maybe not so much on the bigger projects, but then I feel even on those really big projects, they would know, if somebody submitted a tender, they've normally, because they've been asked to submit a tender, and that would normally because, the principal contractor's done their research on that company and they've sort of reached out to them because they feel like they'd be a good fit for that role potentially. So I feel there are certain things that do happen in the back end there that can sort of improve conversions in that regard to a degree anyway. But, if someone's coming in cold, or if you're going in cold to a quote or a tender or whatever, then you've got to expect that people are going to want to do a bit of research on you. Cool. Well, we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about how to stop our competitors from pinching our clients. That's a bit of a fun topic, and I know for sure actually one of my friends and colleagues and former clients, he was a plumber, and he had another one of his another friend of ours come and steal his major building client. That didn't go down too well. But yeah, it does happen, and I suppose there's steps that we can take to mitigate those risks as well, which is what we're going to talk about in the next episode. Helen, thanks for your time. Listeners, viewers, if you want to get more information or if you want you got any feedback or any experiences with that whole realm of employing contractors and things that you've encountered within your business professional career that have either worked positively or negatively against you, then by all means, we'd love to hear them. So jump into the community and let us know what they are when you see these podcasts come through there. And Helen, thanks once again for your time.
That's okay, it's a pleasure. And as always, I will share some contact details so that if anyone wants a free chat with me about any commercial legal issue, I'd be more than happy to chat with anyone.
Yeah, cool. We'll put that in the show notes, guys. So head across there and you can get hold of Helen's calendar link. All right, rock and roll. Until next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to the siteshed.com where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.